I stared at the Ancestry test results on my laptop screen, my coffee growing cold as the implications hit me like a freight train. According to this DNA analysis, I wasn't related to a single person I'd called family for 47 years. The Swedish heritage my grandmother had proudly shared through countless stories, the Irish lineage we'd traced back generations, the family recipes passed down through what I thought was my bloodline, all of it was apparently a lie. Before I tell you this incredible story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Margaret Anderson. I'm 47 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I'd ordered the Ancestry kit on a whim during a Black Friday sale, excited to surprise my family with detailed information about our genetic background for our upcoming reunion. Instead, I'd uncovered what appeared to be the most elaborate deception I'd ever encountered. The test showed I was primarily Eastern European with significant Mediterranean ancestry. Nothing that aligned with the carefully constructed family tree that had hung in our hallway for decades. Even more disturbing, when I cross-referenced the DNA matches, none of the people listed as close relatives had surnames I recognized. No Andersons, no Carlsons from my supposed Swedish side, no O'Briens from the Irish branch we'd always celebrated on St. Patrick's Day. My hands were shaking as I called my daughter Emma Anderson into the kitchen. At 22, Emma had always been my closest confidant, especially since her father and I divorced when she was 15. She worked as a graphic designer from our home office, and I could hear her wrapping up a client call before she appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in the messy bun that had become her trademark during work hours. "Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost," Emma said, immediately moving to sit beside me at our kitchen island. "What's wrong?" I turned the laptop toward her, pointing at the results that had turned my world upside down. "Remember that Ancestry test I took? The results came back, and Emma, something is very wrong. According to this, I'm not related to anyone in our family." Emma leaned forward, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through the data. She'd always been analytical, a trait that served her well in design, but also made her an excellent sounding board when I needed to work through problems. "Mom, these tests aren't always accurate. Maybe there was a mix-up at the lab, or contamination, or something technical went wrong." But even as she said it, I could see the concern growing in her eyes. Emma had inherited what we'd always assumed was the family trait of being able to read people's emotions instantly. She could see that I'd already considered and dismissed the simple explanations. "I thought the same thing initially," I admitted, pulling up the additional research I'd done. "But look at this. I contacted the company, and they confirmed the sample was processed correctly. I even looked up some of these DNA matches, and they're legitimate people with detailed family trees that go back generations. Emma, what if everything we know about our family history is fabricated?" The kitchen fell silent, except for the humming of our refrigerator. This room had always been the heart of our home, where we'd shared countless meals and conversations. The walls were decorated with photos spanning generations, or at least what I'd believed were generations of our family. Now I found myself questioning every face, every story, every connection I'd taken for granted. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Okay, let's think about this logically. Who would know the truth about our family history? And why would anyone fabricate something this elaborate?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from my older brother, David Anderson. "Margaret, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? It's about the Ancestry test you mentioned at dinner last week." My blood ran cold. David lived just 15 minutes away, and we'd maintained a close relationship throughout our adult lives. He was 51, worked as an accountant, and had always been the family historian. He was the one who'd helped create that detailed family tree who'd organized our genealogy research, who'd connected us with distant relatives through various Ancestry websites over the years. "Emma, look at this," I said, showing her David's message. "How would he know about my test results unless he knows something he hasn't told you?" Emma finished, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at my phone, my mind racing through decades of family memories. David had always been the one with answers about our heritage. When I'd asked questions about inconsistencies in family stories, he'd provided explanations. When relatives seemed to have conflicting memories about events, he'd smoothed over the discrepancies. I'd always attributed his knowledge to his meticulous nature and genuine interest in genealogy. Now I was wondering if his role as family historian had been something else entirely. "I need to talk to someone outside the family about this," I said, reaching for my phone again. "Someone who can help me think through this objectively." I scrolled to the contact for Patricia Williams, my closest friend, for over 15 years. Patricia and I had met when Emma was in elementary school, both of us struggling single mothers trying to balance careers and parenting. She'd become like a sister to me, someone I trusted with my deepest concerns and biggest decisions. As a retired librarian, she also had research skills that had proven invaluable over the years. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Margaret, perfect timing. I just finished organizing my book club notes. What's going on?" "Patricia, I need your help with something, and it's going to sound completely insane," I began, explaining the Ancestry test results and David's cryptic message. There was a long pause before Patricia responded. "Margaret, I have to tell you something. I've always wondered about some of the stories your family told about your background. Some of the dates never quite added up, and there were details that seemed inconsistent. But I never wanted to say anything because it wasn't my place. And honestly, I thought maybe I was just overthinking things." My heart sank. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Well, for instance, your grandmother's immigration story. She always said she came over in 1943, but that would have been nearly impossible during the war. And some of the cultural traditions your family claimed were Swedish. I looked them up once out of curiosity, and they seemed to be from completely different regions." Emma was listening intently to my side of the conversation, and I could see her taking notes on a piece of paper. She wrote, "Ask about the family photos." "Patricia, what about the family photos we have? The old ones that supposedly show relatives from Sweden and Ireland?" "Honestly, Margaret, I always thought some of those looked like they could be stock photos or images from historical collections." The clothing and settings seemed almost too perfect, too generic. But again, I didn't want to question something so personal to your family. After I hung up with Patricia, Emma and I sat in stunned silence. The evidence was mounting that our entire family identity had been constructed, but the why remained a complete mystery. "Mom, we need to be prepared for the possibility that David's message isn't coincidental," Emma said carefully. "If our family history is fabricated, someone had to create that fabrication, and David has always been the keeper of our family stories." I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination settling in my chest. "I know, but I need to understand why. What could possibly motivate someone to create such an elaborate false history? And what does this mean for us, for our real identity?" Emma stood up and moved to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban neighborhood. "Maybe the question isn't just about our past, Mom. Maybe we need to figure out what this means for our future. If we can't trust the foundation of our family story, what else might not be what it seems?" As I prepared to drive to David's house that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change not just my understanding of my past, but my relationship with the people I loved most. The Ancestry test had been meant to bring our family closer together through shared heritage. Instead, it had revealed cracks in the foundation of everything I'd believed about myself. But what I discovered next was a small detail that blew the whole thing open. The drive to David's house felt like traveling through a fog of uncertainty. Every familiar street corner seemed to mock me with its normalcy, while my world crumbled beneath the surface. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto his tree-lined street, the autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and crimson that would have seemed beautiful any other day. Today, they just reminded me of how things could look perfect on the surface while rotting underneath. David's colonial-style house sat back from the road, its white shutters and wraparound porch embodying the same traditional American values he'd always claimed our family represented. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Even his landscaping told a story of deep roots and established heritage, with mature oak trees that had probably been planted decades before our family's fabricated narrative began. I sat in my car for several minutes, watching the warm light spill from his windows. Through the front window, I could see David moving around his living room, the same room where he'd told me countless stories about our brave Irish ancestors and resilient Swedish great-grandparents. My stomach churned as I realized that every family gathering, every holiday dinner filled with tales of our heritage, might have been built on lies. The front door opened before I even reached the porch steps. David stood there, his usually confident posture slightly hunched, his silver hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. The man who had always seemed like a pillar of strength and family wisdom looked suddenly fragile, older than his 72 years. "Margaret," he said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been expecting you." His living room felt different tonight. The walls lined with family photographs that had once filled me with pride now seemed to leer down at us like evidence in a courtroom. The antique furniture he'd claimed belonged to our Swedish ancestors appeared suddenly suspect, their authenticity as questionable as everything else I'd believed about our family. "David, I need you to tell me the truth," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "All of it." He sank heavily into his leather armchair, the same one where he'd held Emma as a baby while spinning tales of her brave lineage. I knew this day would come eventually. I just hoped it would be after I was gone. The admission hit me like a physical blow. "So it's true? Everything we believed about our family is a lie?" David's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water on the side table. "Not everything, Margaret. The love, the bonds between us, the values we've shared, those are real. But the history, the ancestry, the stories of where we came from." He trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but it carried decades of trust and the weight of my shattered identity. "Your grandmother and I, we came from nothing, Margaret. Worse than nothing. We came from shame and violence and poverty that you can't even imagine." His voice grew stronger as he continued, as if finally telling the truth was giving him energy. "We wanted something better for our children, for you, for Emma. We wanted you to have a heritage you could be proud of." I felt my legs give way, and I collapsed onto his couch, the same couch where Emma had curled up as a child listening to his stories. But why such elaborate lies? Why not just start fresh? "Because people need roots, Margaret. They need to know where they come from. And our real story?" He shook his head. "Our real story would have followed you and Emma like a shadow. We thought we were protecting you." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of deception. "What is our real story, David? Who are we really?" David stood up slowly and walked to an old wooden chest I'd seen 1,000 times, but never questioned. He pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked it, revealing a collection of documents and photographs I'd never seen before. The musty smell of old paper filled the air as he lifted out a manila folder. "Your grandmother's real name was Helen Kowalski, not Helena Erickson. She came from a Polish family in Chicago, not Sweden. Her father was involved with some very dangerous people, and her brother?" David paused, his hands shaking as he held a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Her brother was killed when she was 19. The family was destroyed by violence and debt." I stared at the newspaper clipping he handed me, trying to process the black and white photograph of a young man who looked remarkably like Emma around the eyes. The headline spoke of gang violence and a life cut short, nothing like the noble Swedish farmer we'd been told was our ancestor. "And the Irish side?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would shatter another piece of my constructed identity. "My father wasn't Irish, Margaret. He was in and out of prison most of my childhood. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. There was no proud immigration story, no family traditions passed down through generations. There was just survival." The photographs scattered across his coffee table told a different story than the ones hanging on our walls. These faces were harder, worn down by circumstances that had nothing to do with noble struggles or brave New World adventures. These were people who had been forgotten by history, whose stories weren't worth preserving or celebrating. "So you just invented new people to be?" I asked, picking up a photograph of a woman who must have been my real grandmother. She looked tired but determined. Nothing like the smiling Swedish immigrant in the photo I'd grown up treasuring. "We created the family we wished we'd had, the ancestors we wished you could claim. Every story, every tradition, every piece of cultural heritage, we researched it, we learned it, we made it real through sheer force of will." I thought about Emma at home, probably researching our family mystery online, completely unaware that her grandfather was finally revealing the truth. "David, Emma knows something is wrong. She's been helping me investigate. What am I supposed to tell her?" "Tell her the truth, Margaret. Tell her that sometimes love makes people do desperate things. Tell her that we may not have the bloodline we claimed, but we built something real together anyway." The weight of having to destroy my daughter's sense of identity, the same way mine had been destroyed, felt overwhelming. "But why now? Why did you send that message? You could have just let the Ancestry test results remain a mystery." David returned to his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "Because keeping secrets is exhausting, Margaret. And because you and Emma deserve to know who you really are, even if it's not as pretty as the story we gave you." As I prepared to leave his house, my arms full of the real family documents and photographs he'd hidden for decades, I realized that tomorrow would bring an entirely new challenge. I would have to sit Emma down and explain that not only was our family history fabricated, but that the grandfather she adored had been the architect of the deception. But as I drove home through the dark streets, one question haunted me more than all the others. If David had been willing to construct such an elaborate false identity for our family, what else might he have hidden? And why did I have the sinking feeling that the documents he'd shown me tonight were just the beginning of a much deeper mystery? The Ancestry test had opened a door I could never close, and I was beginning to suspect that the truth about my family was far more complicated than even David was willing to admit. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the box of real family documents David had given me. my coffee growing cold as I tried to figure out how to tell Emma everything. The photographs of strangers who were actually my relatives felt foreign in my hands, their faces holding no warmth or recognition for me. Emma arrived earlier than usual, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and that determined look in her eyes that meant she'd been up late researching. "Mom, I've been thinking about what Grandpa David said yesterday," she began, setting her laptop on the table. Something about his reaction just felt off, like he was hiding something bigger. I pushed the box toward her, my hands trembling slightly. "He was hiding something, sweetheart. Something much bigger than either of us imagined?" Emma's eyes widened as she saw the unfamiliar photographs spilling out of the box. She picked up the image of my real grandmother, the tired-looking woman whose name I'd learned was Rose, not the fictional Astrid from Sweden we'd always celebrated. "Who is this?" Emma asked, though I could see the understanding already dawning in her expression. "Your great-grandmother. Your real great-grandmother." I took a deep breath. "Emma, our entire family history is made up. Every story, every tradition, every ancestor we've honored, David and your grandmother created all of it." The color drained from Emma's face as she set the photograph down carefully. "What do you mean, made up?" I spent the next hour walking her through everything David had revealed, watching my daughter's world shift and reshape just as mine had. She listened in stunned silence, occasionally picking up documents or photos, studying the faces of people who should have been familiar, but weren't. "So, we're not Swedish at all?" she finally asked, her voice small. "No, we're not Irish either, or any of the other romantic origins we celebrated. We're just ordinary people with ordinary struggles who got forgotten by time." Emma closed her laptop without opening it. "All those family recipes Grandma taught me, all those stories about great-great-grandfather's adventures in America, all carefully researched fiction," I said gently. "But Emma, the love behind it was real. They wanted to give us something beautiful to belong to." "But it wasn't ours to belong to," Emma said, and I heard an anger in her voice that surprised me. "They stole other people's stories and made us live a lie." Before I could respond, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering, putting it on speaker so Emma could hear. "Margaret, I've been awake all night thinking—" David's voice sounded strained. "There's something else I need to tell you both. Something I wasn't ready to say yesterday." Emma leaned forward, her jaw set. "What now, Grandpa? More lies?" "Emma, please," David said, and I could hear him struggling with something. "The reason we created the false history wasn't just shame about being ordinary. There were things in our real past that we were running from, things that could have hurt you both." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things, David?" "Your real great-grandfather, Rose's husband. He wasn't just poor and forgotten. He was involved in some criminal activities. Nothing violent, but enough that the family name carried a stigma in certain circles. Your grandmother was terrified that someday it might affect your opportunities, your future." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "So instead of trusting us to handle the truth, you decided to play God with our identities?" "We thought we were protecting you," David said quietly. "From what?" Emma turned back toward the phone. "From being human? From having flawed ancestors like everyone else?" I found myself caught between understanding David's motivations and sharing Emma's anger. "David, what else haven't you told us? Because I'm starting to feel like every conversation reveals another layer of deception." There was a long pause before David spoke again. "There's a safe deposit box. Your grandmother made me promise never to open it, never to tell you about it. But after last night, I think you both deserve to know it exists." Emma and I exchanged glances. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know." She said it contained the last pieces of our real history, the parts she couldn't bear to share with anyone. She made me swear that if anything happened to her, I would just let it stay buried. "But you're telling us now," Emma said, her voice sharp. "Because keeping secrets has cost us enough already," David replied. "Because you're both strong enough to handle whatever truth is left." After we hung up, Emma and I sat in heavy silence. The box of documents between us seemed to mock our previous sense of family identity, but now even these real artifacts felt incomplete. "Do you want to know what's in that safe deposit box?" I asked Emma. She looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 25 years. "I want to know everything, Mom. Even if it destroys whatever's left of what I thought I knew about us." As we prepared to call David back and arrange to access the safe deposit box, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something that would make everything we'd learned so far seem simple by comparison. The Ancestry test had started this avalanche of truth, but I was beginning to suspect we hadn't even reached the bottom of the mountain yet. The First National Bank downtown felt like a mausoleum as Emma and I walked through its marble lobby 3 days later. David had driven up from Phoenix that morning, looking haggard and older than I'd ever seen him. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under his eyes, emphasizing the weight of secrets he'd carried for decades. "Box 247, he said quietly to the bank employee, his voice barely audible in the echoing space. His hands trembled slightly as he produced the key from his wallet, a small brass thing that looked ancient compared to everything else in the sterile modern building. The employee led us down a narrow corridor lined with identical metal doors, each one hiding someone's most precious or dangerous possessions. The air smelled of metal and old paper, with an underlying mustiness that suggested secrets left too long in the dark. Emma walked beside me, her jaw set in that determined way she'd inherited from my mother. The irony wasn't lost on me that even our inherited mannerisms might be fabrications now. What was real about us, and what had been carefully constructed? "I need you both to understand," David said as we stopped in front of box 247. "Your grandmother made me promise on her deathbed that this would stay buried. She was terrified of what it might do to the family." "The family that was already built on lies?" Emma's voice carried a bitter edge that made my chest tighten. David flinched but didn't argue. The bank employee inserted her key alongside David's, turned both locks, and slid out a long metal box. It was smaller than I'd expected, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it felt heavy with possibility as she carried it to a private viewing room. The room was claustrophobic, with beige walls and a single table surrounded by 3 uncomfortable chairs. A fluorescent bulb hummed overhead, casting everything in an unflattering yellow light. David set the box on the table and stared at it for a long moment. "I've wondered about this for 15 years, he admitted. "There were nights I almost came here, almost opened it, but I kept my promise to her." "Until now," I said, not unkindly. "Until now." He lifted the lid with the reverence of someone opening a coffin. The box contained 3 manila envelopes, each one labeled in Rose's careful handwriting. The sight of her script made my throat constrict. Even her handwriting had felt like a constant in my life, appearing on birthday cards and grocery lists and notes tucked into my lunchbox. Now, even that familiar script felt loaded with hidden meaning. The first envelope was labeled, "Immigration Records, Real." David opened it with shaking fingers, revealing a stack of documents that looked genuinely aged, unlike the manufactured antiques we'd discovered in Rose's house. The paper was yellow and brittle, covered in official stamps and signatures. "My God," David whispered, scanning the top document. "We weren't Italian at all. We were Polish, and we came through Ellis Island in 1923, not 1889. Emma leaned forward, her earlier anger temporarily replaced by curiosity. "What else does it say?" David's face grew pale as he read. "Your great-great-grandfather wasn't a farmer. He was fleeing Poland because he'd been accused of collaborating with occupying forces during World War I. The charges were never proven, but the family had to leave everything behind." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I found myself gripping the edge of the table. "So we're descended from a possible traitor? Or someone falsely accused," David said quickly. "These are just allegations, not convictions. But you can see why Rose felt the need to create a different story." Emma reached for the second envelope, labeled Financial Records, Chicago. Inside were bank statements and business documents from the 1940s and 1950s, all bearing the real family name we'd never known we had. "Kowalski," Emma read aloud. "Our real name was Kowalski." The documents painted a picture of a family struggling to establish themselves in Chicago, taking any work they could find. There were receipts from a small grocery store, records of loans taken and slowly repaid, evidence of the grinding poverty that Rose had tried to erase from our family story. But there were also records of something else. Emma's face changed as she read deeper into the stack. "Mom, look at this." She handed me a police report dated 1952. My grandfather's real name, Stefan Kowalski, appeared multiple times in connection with illegal gambling operations in Chicago's Polish neighborhoods, not as a victim or witness, but as someone who'd been questioned repeatedly about his involvement. "He was running numbers," David said quietly, reading over my shoulder. "Small-time stuff, but enough to get the family in trouble with both the police and some dangerous people." The third envelope felt the heaviest, though it contained the fewest documents. Rose's handwriting on the label was shakier, as if she'd written it when she was already ill. "The real reason we left Chicago." Inside was a single newspaper clipping from 1954 and a handwritten letter in Rose's careful script. The newspaper headline made my blood run cold. "Police informant found dead in Lincoln Park." The article was brief but devastating. A man named Joseph Kowalski, described as a key witness in an ongoing investigation into illegal gambling operations, had been found beaten to death. The police suspected it was retaliation for his cooperation with their investigation. Rose's letter, clearly written years later, filled in the terrible details. Joseph Kowalski had been my grandfather's brother. Stefan had been pressured by police to inform on the gambling ring he'd been part of, but when he'd refused, they'd gone to Joseph instead. Joseph had agreed to cooperate, and it had cost him his life. The family blamed Stefan. David read from Rose's letter, his voice barely a whisper. They said his criminal activities had put Joseph in danger. The threats against our family became so serious that we had to leave Chicago in the middle of the night. We came to California with nothing but the clothes we wore and a promise to never speak the Kowalski name again. The viewing room fell silent except for the persistent hum of the fluorescent light. I stared at the documents spread across the table, trying to reconcile this story of violence and betrayal with the gentle family mythology Rose had created for us. Emma was the first to speak. "So, our great-grandfather wasn't just involved in petty crime. His choices got his own brother killed." "We don't know that," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The situation was complicated. Stefan might have been trying to protect his family by not cooperating with police. And instead, his brother died for it. Emma replied flatly. I felt a strange numbness settling over me. The Ancestry test had started this avalanche, but I could never have imagined it would lead us here, to a story of violence and family betrayal that made Rose's fabricated history seem almost kind by comparison. There's something else, David said, reaching into the bottom of the box. He pulled out a small address book, its leather cover worn smooth with age. Rose kept this hidden, but I think it contains contact information for family members who might still be in Chicago. Emma and I stared at the address book as if it might explode. After everything we'd learned, the possibility of living relatives felt both thrilling and terrifying. Do you think any of them are still alive? I asked. David opened the book carefully, revealing pages of names, addresses, and phone numbers in Rose's handwriting. Some entries had been crossed out over the years, but others remained untouched, as if Rose had been unable to bring herself to delete them entirely. Some of these addresses have been updated multiple times, he said, studying the pages. Rose was keeping track of family members for decades, even though she never contacted them. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rose hadn't just hidden our past. She'd actively maintained knowledge of our living relatives while keeping us completely isolated from them. We might have cousins, aunts, uncles, who had wondered for 60 years what had happened to Stefan Kowalski and his family. Emma reached for the address book with trembling fingers. Mom, what if we have family out there who've been looking for us this whole time? The weight of Emma's questions settled over us like dust from an open tomb. I watched my daughter trace her finger along the faded ink entries in Rose's address book, each name representing a piece of our lives that had been deliberately severed. Look at this one, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pointed to an entry near the middle of the book. Anna Kowalski Morrison. The address has been updated 4 times. Rose was tracking her for decades. David leaned closer, his reading glasses catching the harsh fluorescent light. The storage facility's concrete walls seemed to press in around us as he studied the page. Anna would have been Stefan's niece. If she's still alive, she'd be in her 80s now. I felt my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. Fear mixed with longing, creating a cocktail of anxiety that made my hands shake. What if they hate us? What if they blame our family for what happened to Stefan's brother? What if they don't even remember us? Emma countered, but I could hear the hope threading through her practical words. What if they've been wondering what happened to us all these years? The storage unit felt impossibly small now, filled with the ghosts of choices made before we were born. I could smell the musty cardboard of the boxes, the metallic tang of the old documents, and something else. The faint scent of Rose's lavender perfume that still clung to her belongings, even after all this time. Mom had been unusually quiet during this entire revelation, sitting on an overturned crate with her hands folded in her lap. Her silence was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. I knew that look. It was the same expression she'd worn when the doctors first mentioned Dad's diagnosis. A careful blankness that meant she was processing something too large to fully comprehend. Mom, I said gently, what are you thinking? She looked up at me, and I saw tears she was trying not to shed. I'm thinking about all the Sunday dinners we could have had. All the Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the graduations. Her voice cracked slightly. Rose robbed us of 60 years of family. David closed the address book carefully and set it on the table next to the other documents. She thought she was protecting you? The threats were real. We have the police reports to prove it. But you're right, Margaret. The cost was enormous. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing the small space between the stacked boxes. Her footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. We can't change what Rose did, but we can decide what we do next. We have names, addresses, phone numbers. We could reach out. Or we could leave it alone, I said, surprising myself with the words. Maybe some secrets are meant to stay buried. Emma stopped pacing and stared at me. Are you serious? We just discovered we might have living relatives, people who could tell us stories about our real family, and you want to walk away? The tension in the small space was palpable. I could feel the weight of 3 generations of women grappling with the same impossible choice: safety in isolation or the risk of connection. I'm scared, I admitted. What if we open this door and find something worse than what we already know? What if there are more secrets, more violence, more reasons why Rose felt she had to cut us off completely? Mom reached over and took my hand. Her skin was paper-thin and warm, marked with age spots that reminded me how much time we'd already lost. Fear is what got us into this situation in the first place? Rose was so afraid of the past that she created an entirely false present. David nodded slowly. Your mother's right. Fear has been making decisions for this family for too long. Emma sat back down, her energy deflating slightly. So, what do we do? Start with a phone call? A letter? Show up on someone's doorstep and say, "Hi, we're the family that disappeared 60 years ago?" I looked around at the evidence of our fabricated history scattered across the table. Rose's careful lies mixed with fragments of brutal truth. The fluorescent light continued its persistent humming, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear a door slamming as another family accessed their own stored memories. There's something else we need to consider, I said slowly. If we reach out to these people, we're not just revealing ourselves. We're potentially disrupting their lives too. They've built their own stories around our disappearance. Mom squeezed my hand tighter. That's a risk we'll have to take. They deserve to know we're alive, just like we deserve to know they existed. Emma picked up the address book again, opening it to a page near the back. Her face went pale as she read something there. What is it? David asked. Emma's voice was barely audible. There's an entry here dated just 2 months ago. Rose was still updating this book right before she died. The silence that followed Emma's words felt heavy and electric. I watched my daughter's face as she stared down at the address book, her finger tracing whatever entry had shocked her into stillness. What does it say? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Emma cleared her throat and read aloud. Margaret Kowalski Thompson, 1247 Cedar Street, Portland. Phone disconnected as of March 15th. She looked up at me with wide eyes. That's you, Sarah. She was tracking you. Us. The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting momentary shadows across the table covered with Rose's papers. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the storage unit. She knew where I lived? I whispered. All these years, she knew exactly where to find me? Mom leaned forward, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the folding table. Show me that book. Emma passed it across, and Mom flipped through the pages with shaking fingers. Her lips moved silently as she read, and I could see her face growing paler with each entry she discovered. There are addresses for all of us here, Mom said finally. Emma, your apartment on 5th Street. David, your office address? She looked up at him with something that might have been accusation, or might have been fear. Did you know about this? David shook his head emphatically. I had no idea Rose was keeping tabs on anyone. She never mentioned family, never talked about the past. I thought I was the only person in her life. Emma stood up abruptly and began pacing again, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. This changes everything. She wasn't just hiding from her past, she was actively monitoring us, watching us from a distance. I felt a strange mix of violation and grief wash over me. Why would she do that? Why keep track of us, but never reach out? Maybe she wanted to, Mom said softly. Maybe she was trying to work up the courage. Or maybe she was making sure we weren't getting too close to the truth? I countered, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. David picked up one of the newspaper clippings and studied it carefully. There's something else we should consider. If Rose was keeping current information about all of you, and if she really was in some kind of danger all these years, then she might have put you at risk too. The implications of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. Emma stopped pacing and turned to face us, her expression shifting from shock to something approaching panic. You think someone might have been watching us too? She asked. I don't know, David admitted. But Rose was paranoid about security. She had 3 different locks on her door, never used her real name for anything official, paid everything in cash. That level of caution doesn't develop overnight. I thought about my own life over the past few decades. Had there been signs I'd missed? Moments when I'd felt watched or followed? The idea that Rose's secrets might have cast a shadow over my entire adult life without my knowledge made me feel sick. Mom closed the address book with a decisive snap. We're getting ahead of ourselves. The fact that Rose kept track of us doesn't necessarily mean we were in danger. Maybe it just means she cared more than she was able to show. But it does mean she could have contacted us any time she wanted, Emma pointed out. She chose not to. Even when she was dying, she chose to leave us this puzzle instead of just telling us the truth directly. I looked around at the evidence of Rose's elaborate deception spread across the table. Birth certificates, photographs, letters, all carefully crafted to support a false narrative. The amount of work it must have taken to maintain such an extensive lie was staggering. Maybe that's exactly what she was doing, I said slowly. Telling us the truth, just not directly. She knew we'd find this storage unit. David, you said she left you specific instructions about what to do with her belongings. David nodded. She was very clear about bringing you the key and making sure you understood it was important. At the time, I thought she was just being sentimental about family keepsakes. Emma sat back down and picked up the photograph of Rose as a young woman. So, this was all intentional. She wanted us to discover her real identity, learn about our family history, find these addresses and phone numbers. But why make us work for it? I asked. Why not just write us a letter explaining everything? Mom reached across the table and touched my arm. Because she knew we might not believe her, or we might be too afraid to act on the information. This way, we had to choose to keep digging. We had to want the truth badly enough to search for it. The weight of that realization settled over me. Rose hadn't just left us a mystery to solve. She'd left us a test. A way to measure how much we were willing to risk for the chance at connection. Emma flipped through the address book again, stopping at different pages. Some of these entries go back decades. She's been updating this thing for years, tracking marriages, divorces, deaths, new addresses. She paused at one entry and her face went white. Oh my God! What now? I asked, though I was beginning to dread each new revelation. Emma's voice was barely audible as she read. Sarah's daughter, Emma, graduated Portland State University 2019, works at Morrison Marketing, recently engaged to Michael Chen. The storage unit fell completely silent, except for the persistent humming of the fluorescent light. I stared at my daughter, seeing my own shock reflected in her face. "She knew about Michael," Emma whispered. "She knew I was engaged before we even announced it publicly." David leaned forward, his face creased with concern. "How is that even possible? Emma, when did you and Michael get engaged?" 3 months ago," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We haven't even sent out announcements yet. We've only told immediate family and a few close friends." I felt a chill run down my spine as I processed what this meant. She's been watching us. All these years, Rose has been keeping tabs on our lives. "But how?" Emma flipped through more pages of the address book, her hands trembling slightly. "There's information in here about all of us. Look at this entry about you, Mom." She pointed to another page, where I could see my own name written in Rose's careful handwriting, followed by details about my job, my divorce from Emma's father, even the year I moved to my current house. "This is getting really creepy," David said, running his hand through his hair. "I mean, I understand wanting to know about family, but this level of surveillance?" I took the address book from Emma and flipped through it myself, seeing entry after entry documenting our lives with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Birth dates, anniversaries, career changes, address updates. Rose had been building a comprehensive file on her living relatives for decades. "Wait," I said, stopping at a page near the back. "Look at this." The page was titled "Contact Attempts" and contained a chronological list of dates going back 15 years. Next to each date was a brief note. "Called Sarah's number, hung up when she answered. Drove past Emma's graduation, stayed in car. Saw David at grocery store, didn't approach." Emma read over my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "She tried to reach out to us, multiple times. But she never followed through," David pointed out, though his tone was gentler now. "She had opportunities, and she chose not to take them." I continued reading the entries, feeling my heart break a little more with each one. Called to congratulate Sarah on new job, lost courage. Wanted to send Emma birthday card, decided against it. David looked happy at the park with his kids, didn't want to intrude. She was protecting us, I realized. Or at least, she thought she was. She wanted to be part of our lives, but she was afraid of disrupting them. Emma sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs. So, she settled for watching from a distance, collecting information about us like we were characters in a story she couldn't be part of. The storage unit felt smaller now, weighted down with the implications of Rose's secret surveillance. I found myself looking at the boxes and files with new eyes, wondering what other intimate details of our lives she had documented. David picked up one of the photographs we hadn't examined yet. "This changes everything we thought we knew about her motivations. She wasn't just hiding her past from us. She was actively involved in our present, just invisibly. The question is," Emma said, "what did she want us to do with this information? She left us addresses and phone numbers for people she clearly knew. She documented her attempts to contact us. What's the next step she expected us to take?" I looked at the list of contact attempts again, noting that the most recent entry was dated just 6 months before Rose's death. Maybe she expected us to be braver than she was, to actually make the calls she couldn't bring herself to make. "Or maybe," David said quietly, "she was hoping we'd understand why she made the choices she did. Why she kept her distance, even when she desperately wanted to be closer." Emma stood up and walked to the back wall of the storage unit, where several boxes remained unopened. "There's more here. We've barely scratched the surface of what she left us." She pulled down a medium-sized box labeled "Letters Never Sent" and set it on the table. The tape sealing it was old and yellowed, suggesting the box had been packed years ago and never reopened. "Should we?" Emma asked, looking at David and me. I hesitated. Each revelation had been more emotionally challenging than the last, and I wasn't sure how much more I could process in one day. But the need to understand Rose's story, our story, was stronger than my fear of what we might find. "Yes," I said. "We've come this far." Emma carefully opened the box, revealing stacks of envelopes organized by year and secured with rubber bands. The earliest stack was labeled 1995, the most recent 2019. Decades of unsent communication. David whistled softly. "She wrote to us for 24 years and never sent a single letter." Emma picked up the most recent stack and removed the rubber band. The top envelope was addressed to her in Rose's handwriting, with a date from just after her college graduation. "This one's about my graduation," Emma said, holding the envelope like it might break. "She was there. She saw me graduate and went home and wrote me a letter about it." "Open it," I urged, though my own voice was unsteady. Emma carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, tears began streaming down her face. "What does it say?" David asked gently. Emma's voice cracked as she read aloud. "My dearest Emma, I watched you walk across that stage today and felt such overwhelming pride. You looked so much like your grandmother at that age, confident and ready to take on the world. I wanted to run to you, to tell you how proud I am, to explain everything. But I know I gave up that right long ago. I hope someday you'll understand that staying away was the hardest thing I ever did. But I believed it was what was best for you. You deserve a family unburdened by the mistakes I made. I love you more than you'll ever know. Always, Rose." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Emma's quiet crying. I reached over and squeezed her hand, my own eyes filling with tears. "There are dozens of these," David said, looking at all the stacks of letters. "Letters to all of us, documenting years of love and regret and missed opportunities." I picked up a stack from the early 2000s and found several letters addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened the first one, dated just after my divorce. The letter was full of comfort and advice Rose had wanted to offer during one of the most difficult periods of my life. She had somehow known about my struggles and had written pages of support and encouragement that I had never received when I needed them most. She was trying to be there for us in the only way she felt she could, I said. Through these letters she never sent. Emma wiped her eyes and reached for another envelope. "But why keep them? Why not just write them and throw them away if she never intended to send them?" Before anyone could answer, David opened one of his letters and his face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. David looked up at us with an expression of shock and something that might have been fear. "This letter is dated 3 weeks before Rose died. She knew. She knew she was dying, and she wrote to tell me something about why she really left our family." He paused, scanning the letter again. "And it's not what we thought. It's not what we thought at all." David's hands trembled as he held the letter. The rest of us leaned forward, waiting for him to continue reading. "She says she didn't leave because she was ashamed, or because she made mistakes," David said slowly. She left because she was protecting us from someone. Someone who threatened to hurt our family if she didn't disappear. Emma stopped crying and stared at him. What do you mean, threatened? David scanned the letter again, his brow furrowed. She doesn't name who it was, but she says this person had the power to destroy everything our parents had built. Their business, their reputation, maybe even their safety. Rose believed that if she stayed, this person would follow through on their threats. I felt a chill run down my spine. So she sacrificed herself to protect the rest of the family? It looks that way, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. She writes that she hoped we would understand someday, but she couldn't risk telling anyone the truth while this person was still alive. Emma reached for more letters from the same time period. Maybe there's more information in the other recent ones. As she opened another envelope, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The return address on some of the letters wasn't from the same town where Rose had been living when she died. David, look at this, I said, pointing to the addresses. These letters are from different places. She was moving around a lot in her final years. David examined the envelopes I was holding. You're right. Look at the dates and locations. She was in Oregon, then Nevada, then back to California, but different cities each time. Like she was running from someone, Emma said quietly, or hiding. The weight of this revelation settled over us. For decades, we had believed Rose was selfish, that she had abandoned her family for her own reasons. Now we were discovering that she might have been living in fear, constantly moving to keep some unknown threat away from us. I opened one of my letters from the middle period, hoping to find more clues. This one was different from the others. Instead of comfort or encouragement, it was filled with specific memories of our childhood together, stories about our parents that I had never heard before. Listen to this, I said, reading from the letter. She writes about Dad's real reason for starting his business. She says it wasn't just ambition, that he was trying to help families who had been cheated by larger companies. And Mom apparently donated anonymously to families in crisis, but never wanted credit for it. Emma looked up from her own letter. Mine talks about family traditions that got lost after Rose left. She describes Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations that she wishes she could have been part of, but then she says something strange. Emma's voice grew more serious as she continued reading. She says she hopes that whoever is reading these letters will understand that some secrets die with the people who keep them, and maybe that's for the best. David and I exchanged glances. The implication was clear, but also frustrating. Rose had taken her secret to the grave, and we might never know who had threatened our family or why. There's something else, David said, holding up the letter he had been reading. She mentions that she left something for us, something that would help us understand everything. But it's not with these letters. What kind of something? I asked. She doesn't say exactly, but she writes that she hid it somewhere safe, somewhere only family would think to look. She says if we're reading these letters, then we're ready to find it. Emma stood up and looked around the storage unit. It has to be here somewhere. She wouldn't have put these letters here if the other thing wasn't nearby. We began searching more systematically through the remaining boxes and furniture. Most contained typical household items, photo albums, and more personal papers. But in the very back of the unit, behind an old dresser, David found a small, fireproof safe. This wasn't visible from the front, he said, trying to lift it. It's heavy. The safe had a combination lock, and there was no obvious indication of what the combination might be. We stared at it, so close to answers, but unable to access them. Try important dates, Emma suggested. Birthdays, anniversaries. David tried several combinations based on family dates we could remember, but nothing worked. The safe remained locked, holding what might be the final piece of Rose's story. Wait, I said, remembering something from one of the letters. In my letter, Rose mentioned a specific date that seemed random at the time. She called it the day everything changed. Let me find it again. I searched through my stack of letters until I found the reference. Here it is. She mentions October 15th, but doesn't say what year. Emma grabbed the safe and started trying different combinations using that date with various years. On her third attempt, we heard a click. The safe opened to reveal a thick manila envelope and what appeared to be a small recording device. David carefully removed both items, and we could see that the envelope was sealed and marked with all our names. She recorded something, Emma said, staring at the device. After all these years of written letters, she made a recording. David looked at each of us before speaking. Are we ready for this? Once we listen to whatever she recorded, we can't unknow it. I thought about everything we had discovered so far, about the family history that had been completely rewritten in the space of a few hours. We've come this far. We owe it to Rose, and to ourselves, to hear what she wanted to tell us. Emma nodded in agreement, but I could see the apprehension in her eyes. David pressed the play button, and Rose's voice filled the small storage unit, as clear as if she were standing right there with us. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone, and you found the letters I could never send. Rose's recorded voice began. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see our entire family, and I'm not sure that's a gift or a burden. Rose's voice continued from the recording device, and we all leaned closer, despite the clarity of the audio. There was something about hearing her speak these words that made them feel more real, more immediate than the letters had. I've spent 60 years carrying secrets that weren't mine to keep, but I didn't know how to let them go without destroying the family I helped create. Your grandfather, the man you all called Papa, wasn't who any of us thought he was. Emma reached for my hand, and I could feel her trembling slightly. David had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on the recording device as if he could see Rose speaking. Papa's real name was James Mitchell, not James Crawford, as we all believed. He came to our town in 1952 with papers that belonged to another man, a man who had died in Korea. He took that identity because he was running from something, though it took me years to piece together what that something was. I felt my stomach drop. Everything we thought we knew about our grandfather, the stories about his military service, his family history, all of it was built on a lie. He told me the truth 3 years after he and your grandmother married, when I caught him burning papers in the backyard one night. He was terrified, convinced that someone would eventually come looking for him, but no one ever did. David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. So our entire family name is fake? Everything we thought we inherited from his side doesn't belong to us. Emma squeezed my hand tighter. Let her finish. There has to be more. Rose's voice continued, and I could hear the weight of years in her tone. James Mitchell was wanted for desertion, but not the kind you might think. He had been ordered to participate in something during the war that he couldn't live with. He never told me exactly what, but he said innocent people died because of orders he followed, and when he was given similar orders again, he refused and ran. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. Our grandfather hadn't been a war hero or even a typical deserter. He had been a man trying to escape something that haunted him. Your grandmother never knew, Rose continued. James made me promise never to tell her, and I kept that promise even after she died. He said she deserved to love the man he was trying to become, not the man he had been. I thought about all the family gatherings where Papa had been quiet during conversations about military service, how he had always changed the subject when people thanked him for his service. We had attributed it to modesty, but now it made perfect sense. The man you knew as your grandfather was genuinely good, Rose said, and her voice grew warmer. Whatever he had done during the war, whatever he was running from, he spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it. He worked extra jobs to send money anonymously to veteran organizations. He volunteered at the hospital every weekend for 30 years. He never missed a single one of your school events or birthday parties. Emma was crying now, but quietly. He was still Papa, she said. He was still the man who taught us to fish and helped with homework. David nodded slowly. But why didn't Rose tell us this before? Why wait until after she died? The recording seemed to answer his question. I'm telling you this now because I realized that keeping this secret was my choice, not his. James died 20 years ago, and I've been carrying this alone ever since. You deserve to know your real history, but more than that, you deserve to decide what to do with this knowledge. Rose paused in the recording, and we could hear her moving around, papers rustling in the background. The envelope contains everything I know about James Mitchell's real identity, including the last letter he received from his actual family before he disappeared. His sister never stopped looking for him. She died 10 years ago, but she had children, grandchildren. You have real cousins out there who never knew what happened to their uncle. My mind was racing. We had living relatives we had never met, people who might have spent decades wondering what happened to a family member who simply vanished. But here's what I want you to understand, Rose continued, her voice becoming more urgent. James Crawford, the identity he took, belonged to a man with no living family. No one was hurt by James taking that name except James himself, who could never fully escape his past. The family he built with your grandmother was real. The love he gave you was real. The man he became was real. David picked up the envelope and turned it over in his hands. She's giving us a choice, he said. We can reach out to his real family, or we can let sleeping dogs lie. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at both of us. What do you think Papa would want us to do? I considered this carefully. Based on everything Rose had told us, Papa had spent his entire adult life trying to protect the family he had built while carrying the guilt of the family he had left behind. I think he would want us to do whatever feels right to us, I said finally. Rose is right that this is our choice now. The recording continued, and Rose's voice took on a different tone, more personal and direct. There's one more thing, and this is the hardest part for me to tell you. The reason I know so much about James's real identity isn't just because he confided in me. I helped him research his original family over the years. We found his sister, found out about her children, even learned where they lived. James wanted so desperately to reach out to them, but he was terrified that contacting them would bring his past crashing down on all of us. Emma looked up sharply. She helped him spy on his own family? Not spy, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Research, maybe. Try to stay connected from a distance. Rose's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. We drove by his sister's house once, about 15 years ago. James sat in my car across the street and watched his nephew mow the lawn. He cried the entire drive home. He said the boy looked just like his brother who died in France. The weight of Papa's sacrifice was becoming clearer. He hadn't just given up his identity. He had given up any chance of reconnecting with the family he had left behind. I'm telling you this because I think James would want his real family to know what happened to him, to know that he became a good man despite everything. But I also think he would want you to know that choosing our family, the family he built, was the most important decision he ever made. The recording fell silent for a long moment, and we could hear Rose breathing, as if she was gathering courage for whatever came next. "The choice is yours now," she said finally. "But whatever you decide, remember that family isn't just about blood or shared names. It's about the people who choose to love you and stick by you, even when things get complicated." The recording ended with a soft click, leaving the three of us sitting in the storage unit surrounded by boxes and the weight of everything we had just learned. David set down the envelope and looked at Emma and me. "So, what do we do now?" Before either of us could answer, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. Emma held up her phone, her hand shaking slightly. "It's from someone named Patricia Mitchell. She says she's been looking for information about her Uncle James who disappeared in 1952, and she thinks she might have found us." The phone felt like it was burning in Emma's hand as she stared at the message. I watched her face cycle through shock, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Read it again," David said quietly. Emma's voice shook as she read aloud. "Hi, I know this might seem strange, but I've been researching my family tree and came across some information that led me to believe you might be related to my Uncle James Mitchell. He disappeared in 1952 after the war, and our family never knew what happened to him. If this is the wrong family, I apologize, but if not, I'd love to talk. Patricia." The silence in the storage unit was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could smell the musty cardboard and old photographs, could feel the weight of 3 generations of secrets pressing down on us. "How did she find us?" I whispered. Emma scrolled through her phone. "She sent it to my Facebook account. My profile says I'm a Henderson, and I have some old photos of Papa posted from last Christmas." David ran his hands through his hair. This is exactly what Papa was afraid of, his past catching up with the family he built. But as I sat there surrounded by boxes of our fabricated history, I realized something had shifted inside me. The fear that had been gnawing at me since I first saw those DNA results was transforming into something else. Maybe it was Rose's words about family being the people who choose to love you, or maybe it was seeing Papa's handwriting on those letters to Rose, but I felt a strange sense of clarity. "What if Papa was wrong to be afraid?" I said. Both Emma and David looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Think about it," I continued, my thoughts racing. Papa spent 60 years terrified that his real family would destroy the family he built. But what if it doesn't have to be one or the other? What if both families can exist? Emma shook her head. "But the lies, the fake documents, everything we thought we knew about ourselves. The documents are fake," I agreed. "But the love isn't. The memories aren't. Papa raising Dad, Dad raising us, all the Christmases and birthdays and family dinners, none of that was fake." David picked up one of Papa's letters to Rose, studying his handwriting. "Rose said he cried watching his nephew mow the lawn. He never stopped loving his original family. And he never stopped loving us either," I said. "Maybe Patricia isn't a threat. Maybe she's just another person who loved Papa and wanted to know what happened to him." Emma was still staring at her phone. "But what do we tell her? Hi, your uncle stole a dead man's identity and lived under it for 60 years? We tell her the truth," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. We tell her that her Uncle James became our papa, and that he was a good man who built a beautiful family, and that he never forgot where he came from. David nodded slowly. We tell her about the man who taught me to fish, who walked Emma down the aisle at her wedding, who made the best pancakes in 3 counties. We tell her about the man who saved every birthday card we ever gave him. Emma added, her voice growing stronger. Who learned to use a computer at 75 just so he could email us pictures of his garden. I felt tears starting, but they weren't the tears of loss and confusion I'd been crying for weeks. These were different. We tell her that her Uncle James lived a full life, that he was loved, and that his family would like to know about the people who loved him before us. Emma looked down at her phone again, then back at us. Are we really going to do this? Contact her? I think we have to, David said. Not just for her, but for Papa. He spent his whole life afraid of this moment, but maybe it doesn't have to be scary. Maybe it can be healing. I thought about Papa's face in those last months, how he'd sometimes get a distant look when he thought no one was watching. I wondered how many times he'd thought about his sister, about the nephew who looked like his dead brother, about all the family gatherings he'd missed because he was too afraid to reach out. He would want his sister to know he was okay, I said finally. He would want her to know he became someone good. Emma took a deep breath and started typing on her phone. Hi, Patricia. Yes, I think we are related to your Uncle James. This is going to sound incredible, but we have a lot to tell you about what happened to him. Would you like to talk? She showed us the message before hitting send. David and I both nodded. The response came back almost immediately. Yes, please. Our whole family has wondered about him for 70 years. When can we talk? Emma looked at us. Tomorrow? Should we suggest tomorrow? Tomorrow, I agreed. As we packed up Papa's boxes and prepared to leave the storage unit, I realized that everything had changed, and nothing had changed all at once. We were still the same family we'd always been. We still had the same memories, the same love, the same bonds that Papa had helped create. But now, we also had something Papa never allowed himself to have: the possibility of connection without fear. The fabricated documents would always be fabricated. The fake family tree would always be fake. But the real family, the one built on choice and love and 60 years of Sunday dinners, that family was more real than any piece of paper could ever make it. And tomorrow, we were going to help Papa's 2 families finally meet.